The blood that trickled from Maggie Graham's split lip tasted like iron and defeat as she slipped through the weathered doors of Wytrock Chapel, hoping no one would notice her arrival. Tucked away on the outskirts of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, in 1885, the small wooden structure had become her refuge, the only place she believed she could hide from the violent hands of her uncle. The sun cast long shadows through the stained glass windows, painting the worn pews with colors that seemed too beautiful for the ugliness she carried with her. At 22, Maggie had grown accustomed to crafting excuses for her bruises: a fall from the porch, a clumsy stumble, a door that swung too quickly. The truth remained locked behind her trembling lips, much like the prayer book she clutched to her chest as if it might shield her from further harm. "Miss, are you all right?" The deep voice startled her, causing her to whirl around and press herself against the chapel wall. Standing in the doorway was a tall man she didn't recognize, his broad shoulders silhouetted by the setting sun. As he stepped forward, his spurs jingled softly against the wooden floor. His face came into view, strong features softened by kind blue eyes that widened slightly when he noticed her injury. "I'm fine," Maggie whispered, turning her face away, using her hand to cover her split lip. "Just seeking a moment of peace." The stranger removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached blonde hair. "Pardon my intrusion. I'm Adam Thornton, just arrived in town." He kept his distance, seeming to understand her wariness. "Been riding for the Silverado outfit about 20 miles south." "New to these parts." Maggie nodded slightly but remained silent, her fingers instinctively touching her swollen lip. Adam's gaze followed the movement, his expression darkening momentarily before softening again. "You know," he said quietly, "my ma always told me that a chapel is the best place to find healing for the soul and sometimes for other hurts as well." Something in his voice, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his weathered appearance, made her look up and meet his eyes. "I'll be gentle all my days with those who need kindness," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "That was her other lesson, one I've tried to keep." He didn't press further, didn't demand explanations, just stood there with his hat in his hands, offering words that somehow penetrated the fortress she'd built around herself. "Thank you," Maggie finally managed, her voice trembling slightly. "But I should go. My uncle will be looking for me." A flicker of understanding passed across Adam's face. "I'll walk you home, Miss Graham, Maggie Graham," she hesitated. "But that won't be necessary, Mr. Thornton." "Adam, please," he insisted. "And I think it might be very necessary, Miss Graham." The world outside the chapel seemed too bright, too exposed after the dimness within. Maggie pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as they stepped into the late afternoon sun. Adam walked beside her, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. No one had offered her protection in a long time. "How long have you lived in Copper Creek?" he asked, keeping his tone conversational as they made their way down the dusty main street. "All my life," Maggie replied. "My parents died of typhoid when I was 15. I've lived with my uncle ever since." The words were simple facts, stripped of the pain that accompanied them. Adam nodded, his eyes scanning the street ahead. "And your uncle, what's his business in town?" Maggie's step faltered slightly. "He owns the Golden Spur Saloon." Understanding dawned in Adam's eyes. Vernon Graham's reputation had preceded her explanation. The Golden Spur was known throughout the territory for its rough clientele and the iron-fisted owner who ran it. "I see," was all Adam said, but the muscle in his jaw tightened. They walked in silence until they reached the back entrance of the saloon. Piano music and raucous laughter spilled out into the alley. "Thank you for walking with me," Maggie said, not meeting his eyes. "You're very kind, but I'll be at the chapel tomorrow, same time." Adam interrupted gently. "If you'd like company in your prayers." Before Maggie could respond, the back door of the saloon flew open, and a large man with a florid face appeared, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Maggie with a stranger. "Where have you been, girl?" Vernon Graham growled, his voice slurred with drink. "Got rooms need cleaning and men asking for supper." "I was at the chapel, Uncle Vernon," Maggie replied, her voice growing smaller with each word. Vernon's gaze shifted to Adam, sizing him up with undisguised hostility. "And who might you be, cowboy?" Adam straightened to his full height. "Adam Thornton, sir. New hand at the Silverado Ranch, just escorting Miss Graham back from the chapel, being new to town and wanting to make proper acquaintances." Vernon grunted, seemingly appeased by the explanation but not pleased. "Well, she's home now. Maggie, get inside." With one last glance at Adam, Maggie slipped past her uncle and disappeared into the saloon. Vernon lingered, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Adam. "My niece isn't for making acquaintances with saddle tramps, Thornton. Best remember that." Adam kept his expression neutral, though his hands had clenched at his sides. "Just being neighborly, Mr. Graham. Good day to you." As Vernon slammed the door behind him, Adam stood in the alley for a long moment, staring at the weathered wood as if he could see through it to the young woman beyond. Something about Maggie Graham's frightened eyes and split lip had awakened a fierce protectiveness in him that he hadn't expected. He'd come to Copper Creek looking for work, and maybe a fresh start, not to get entangled in someone else's troubles. Yet as he made his way back to the modest boarding house where he'd taken a room, Adam knew he would be at the chapel tomorrow, waiting. True to his word, Adam returned to the chapel the next day and the day after that. On the fourth day, Maggie finally appeared, slipping through the door like a shadow, her eyes darting nervously as if expecting to find her uncle lurking in the corners. "You came," Adam said softly, rising from the pew where he'd been sitting. Maggie nodded, keeping her distance. The split in her lip had begun to heal, but a new bruise bloomed across her cheekbone. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If Uncle Vernon discovers I've been meeting you." "We're in a chapel, Miss Graham," Adam pointed out gently. "Nothing improper about two souls seeking peace under the same roof." A ghost of a smile touched Maggie's lips, the first he'd seen, before quickly fading. "He doesn't see it that way. He thinks. He believes I belong to him. That everything I do reflects on him." Adam's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "No person belongs to another, Maggie, not in the way he thinks." She looked away, her fingers twisting the worn fabric of her shawl. "You don't understand. He took me in when no one else would. Gave me a roof, food." Her voice trailed off, the unspoken price of that charity hanging heavy in the air between them. "There's always another way," Adam said quietly. "Always." Their meetings continued over the following weeks, always in the chapel, always careful. Adam learned that Maggie had once dreamed of becoming a teacher before her parents' death had derailed those ambitions. She learned that Adam had left his home in Missouri after losing his family's farm to drought and debt, riding west with nothing but his horse, his saddle, and the memory of his mother's gentle wisdom. "I had a sister," Adam confided one afternoon as they sat side by side in the last pew, their voices hushed though they were alone. "Catherine. She married young, too young maybe, to a man none of us really knew." He paused, his eyes fixed on the simple wooden cross at the front of the chapel. "He beat her. For years she hid at the bruises, the broken bones, all of it. By the time she came to me for help, he'd nearly killed her." Maggie sat very still, hardly breathing. "What happened to her?" Adam's face darkened. "She didn't make it. He found her at my place, dragged her home." He swallowed hard. "I was too late. After the funeral I confronted him. Things got ugly. I had to leave town fast. You killed him, Maggie whispered, a statement rather than a question. No, Adam replied, his voice hollow, though not for lack of trying. He's still breathing, still walking free while my sister lies cold in the ground. His hands clenched into fists. That's why I won't stand by and watch history repeat itself. Not with you. Maggie reached out hesitantly, her fingers lightly touching his arm. I'm sorry about your sister. But my situation is different. I have nowhere to go, no skills beyond cooking and cleaning, and Uncle Vernon, he has friends in town. The sheriff drinks at his bar. No one would help me against him. I would, Adam said firmly, covering her hand with his own. I know we've only known each other a short time, but I swear to you, Maggie, I'll help you find a way out of this. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, fragile trust blossoming into something deeper, something neither was ready to name. The moment was shattered by the chapel door bursting open. Vernon Graham stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the light, his face contorted with rage. I knew it, he snarled, stalking toward them. I knew you were sneaking off to meet this saddle tramp. Adam stood quickly, positioning himself between Maggie and her uncle. Mr. Graham, there's no cause for anger, we were just talking. Vernon's laugh was harsh. Talking? In an empty chapel? Do you take me for a fool, Thornton? His gaze shifted to Maggie, who had risen and pressed herself against the wall. Get home. Now. She's not going anywhere with you, Adam said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Vernon's hand moved to the pistol at his hip. She's my blood, my responsibility. You're nothing but a drifter with sweet words and empty pockets. His eyes narrowed. The Silverado foreman told me all about you, how you showed up out of nowhere, how nobody knows your past. What are you running from, Thornton? Adam's expression remained impassive, but Maggie could see the tension in his shoulders. My past isn't the issue here. How you treat your niece is. Vernon drew his pistol, pointing it casually at Adam. Step aside, boy. I'm taking Maggie home. Uncle Vernon, please, Maggie pleaded, finding her voice at last. Put the gun away. This is a house of God. Shut your mouth, girl, Vernon snapped. After everything I've done for you, you mean after all the times you've hit her? Adam interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. After you've marked her face and made her fear her own home. Is that what you've done for her, Graham? Vernon's face flushed darker with rage. You know nothing about us, about what it takes to keep a willful girl in line. I know enough, Adam cut in. He turned slightly toward Maggie, never taking his eyes off Vernon. Maggie, go to the preacher's house. Tell Reverend Mills what's happening. She's not going anywhere. Vernon raised the gun higher. What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. Vernon lunged forward to grab Maggie's arm. Adam moved to intercept him. The gun discharged in the struggle, the sound deafening in the small chapel. For one horrifying moment, Maggie thought Adam had been shot, but it was Vernon who staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face as he clutched his thigh where blood was beginning to spread across his trousers. You shot me, he gasped, more stunned than pained as shock set in. You actually shot me. The gun went off in the struggle, Adam said grimly, quickly disarming Vernon. It was your finger on the trigger. Vernon collapsed onto a pew, his face pale beneath its habitual flush. You'll hang for this, he threatened weakly. Adam ignored him, turning to Maggie. Are you hurt? She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear and something else, a dawning realization that everything had changed in that single moment. What do we do now? We get the doctor for your uncle, and then we talk to the sheriff, Adam said firmly. It's time the town knew what's been happening behind the doors of the Golden Spur. Within the hour, the chapel had transformed from a quiet sanctuary to the center of Copper Creek's attention. Doctor Wilson tended to Vernon's wound, painful, but not life-threatening, while Sheriff Taylor took statements from all involved. To Maggie's surprise, Reverend Mills spoke forcefully on her behalf, revealing that he had long suspected Vernon's abuse, but had never been able to convince Maggie to confide in him. "The girl's been bearing those marks for years," the elderly preacher told the sheriff, his normally mild voice sharp with anger. "Half the town suspected, but nobody wanted to cross Vernon Graham." As night fell, Maggie found herself seated in the sheriff's office, a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of cooling coffee in her hands. Adam sat nearby, his expression tense as they waited for Sheriff Taylor to return from the doctor's office where Vernon was being treated. "What happens now?" Maggie asked softly, her voice barely audible. Adam leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "That depends on you, Maggie. Vernon's shot, but he'll recover. If you press charges for the abuse, testify against him." "No one will believe me over him," she whispered. "He'll say I'm lying, that I'm ungrateful." "I'll stand with you," Adam promised. "And from what I've seen today, others will too. The Reverend, for one. Maybe others who have kept quiet all these years." Maggie stared into her coffee cup, watching the dark liquid ripple with her trembling hands. "And if I do this, if I speak out against him, what then? Where would I go? The saloon is my home, however wretched." "You could stay at the Widow Cooper's boarding house for now," Adam suggested. "I know she has a spare room and she's a good woman." The door opened, and Sheriff Taylor entered, removing his hat and running a hand through his graying hair. "Vernon's patched up," he announced. "Doc says he'll be laid up for a few weeks, but he'll walk fine eventually." "And what about charges?" Adam asked. "For what he's done to Maggie all these years," the sheriff sighed heavily, dropping into the chair behind his desk. "That's complicated, without witnesses." "I've seen the bruises," Reverend Mills said from the doorway where he had just appeared. "And so has Dr. Wilson, though Vernon always had an excuse ready. I believe others in town have suspected as well." Sheriff Taylor looked uncomfortable. "Vernon Graham has a lot of influence in this town." "So you're just going to send her back to him?" Adam demanded, rising to his feet. "No," the sheriff replied firmly. "I'm not. Miss Graham, would you be willing to sign a complaint against your uncle? It won't be easy, and I can't promise how it will end, but I'll do my best to see justice done." Maggie looked up, her eyes moving from the sheriff to Reverend Mills and finally to Adam. In his steady gaze, she found the courage she needed. "Yes," she said quietly, "I'll sign." The days that followed were the hardest of Maggie's life. True to his word, the sheriff arrested Vernon once he was well enough to be moved to the jail. The town buzzed with gossip, some supporting Maggie, others calling her ungrateful and worse. The Golden Spur remained closed, its future uncertain. Maggie took the room at Widow Cooper's boarding house, using what little savings she had managed to hide from her uncle over the years. Adam continued his work at the Silverado Ranch, but rode into town each evening to check on her and bring news. "The trial's set for next month," he told her one evening as they walked slowly along the edge of town. The setting sun painted the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson, the beauty at odds with their somber conversation. "The circuit judge will be here by then." Maggie nodded, her hands clasped tightly before her. "I'm afraid, Adam, not just of facing him in court, but of what comes after. If he's convicted, the saloon will probably be sold. If he's not—" She couldn't finish the thought. Adam stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "If he's not convicted, you won't go back to him. I won't allow it." "How could you stop it?" Maggie asked, not challenging but genuinely curious. Adam took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about this, Maggie. I know we haven't known each other long, but I care for you more than I should, perhaps." He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "If things go badly with the trial, we could leave, together, head further west, maybe to California. Start fresh. Maggie stared at him, her heart beating wildly in her chest. Are you suggesting? What exactly are you suggesting, Adam? He took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. I'm suggesting that I want to protect you, to be there for you. If that means marriage, then I'm offering that too. He smiled slightly, a hint of self-deprecation in his expression. It's not the most romantic proposal, I know. Despite everything, Maggie found herself laughing softly. No, it's not, but it might be the most honest one a woman ever received. Her laughter faded, replaced by seriousness. But I can't accept, Adam. Not now, not like this. I won't have you tie yourself to me out of pity or some sense of obligation. It's not pity, Adam insisted. And if there's obligation, it's only to what I feel for you, to what I believe we could be together. Maggie gently extracted her hands from his. Let's get through the trial first. Then we can talk about futures. She smiled sadly. I need to know who I am without my uncle's shadow over me before I can think about being with anyone else, even someone as good and kind as you. Adam nodded, respecting her decision, though disappointment was evident in his eyes. I understand. And I'll wait, Maggie, however long it takes. The trial of Vernon Graham began on a sweltering day in July. The courthouse, really just the largest room in the town hall, was packed with spectators, most driven by curiosity rather than concern for justice. Maggie sat rigidly in the witness chair, her voice barely audible as she recounted years of abuse at her uncle's hands. Vernon, for his part, played the role of the aggrieved guardian to perfection, expressing shock and hurt at his niece's false accusations. He painted a picture of a troublesome, ungrateful girl who had fallen under the spell of a mysterious stranger with unknown intentions. I only ever disciplined her when necessary, Vernon insisted, his hand pressed dramatically to his heart. Any parent or guardian would do the same. And now this drifter, he pointed accusingly at Adam in the gallery, has turned her against her only family. The trial stretched over 3 days, the town growing increasingly divided as testimonies unfolded. Dr. Wilson reluctantly confirmed that he had treated Maggie for injuries consistent with abuse over the years. Reverend Mills spoke passionately about the fear he had seen in her eyes. Several townspeople came forward with accounts of seeing Maggie with bruises or hearing sounds of violence from the saloon. But Vernon had his defenders, 2 men who drank at his establishment, business associates who benefited from his influence, and those who simply believed that a man had the right to rule his household as he saw fit. On the 3rd day, as the trial was drawing to a close, an unexpected witness arrived. Sarah Jenkins, a woman who had worked briefly as a barmaid at the Golden Spur 2 years earlier, took the stand. With quiet dignity, she described how she had witnessed Vernon beating Maggie unconscious after accusing her of flirting with a customer. I quit that very night, Sarah testified. I couldn't bear to watch it anymore. I've carried the shame of my silence ever since. Her testimony visibly affected the judge, a stern man who had remained inscrutable throughout the proceedings. When Vernon's lawyer attempted to discredit her, suggesting she had personal grievances against his client, Sarah stood firm. I have no reason to lie, she said simply. But Miss Graham has every reason to finally speak the truth. The verdict came late in the afternoon. Vernon Graham was found guilty of assault and abuse of his ward. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in the territorial prison, a sentence that sent murmurs of shock through the courtroom. No one had expected Vernon, with his connections and influence, to face such severe consequences. As the sheriff led Vernon away, he locked eyes with Maggie one last time. "This isn't over, girl," he snarled. "I'll be back someday, and then we'll settle accounts." Adam, who had moved to Maggie's side as the verdict was read, placed a protective arm around her shoulders. "He'll never touch you again," he promised quietly. Never. In the aftermath of the trial, Copper Creek slowly adjusted to the absence of Vernon Graham's domineering presence. The Golden Spur was sold to pay his legal fees and the fines imposed by the court. A portion of the proceeds, by order of the judge, went to Maggie as compensation for her years of unpaid labor and suffering. With this unexpected windfall, modest though it was, Maggie faced a future suddenly filled with possibilities rather than fear. She remained at Widow Cooper's boarding house, taking on sewing work and helping at the town's small school where her childhood dream of teaching slowly began to revive. Adam continued his work at the Silverado Ranch, riding into town whenever he could. Their relationship evolved cautiously, built on mutual respect and shared understanding rather than desperate necessity. Maggie was learning who she was without fear shadowing her every move, and Adam was patient, true to his word to wait until she was ready. Autumn painted the desert in subtle hues of amber and bronze. On a crisp October evening, Adam invited Maggie for a ride to a spot he discovered not far from town, a small plateau overlooking the valley where Copper Creek nestled against the hills. "It's beautiful," Maggie breathed as they dismounted. The setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape, and in the distance, the chapel's simple steeple caught the last golden rays. "I thought you might like it," Adam replied, spreading a blanket on a flat rock for them to sit. From his saddlebag, he produced a small picnic fresh bread, cheese, and apples from the ranch's orchard. They ate in comfortable silence, watching as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. When Maggie finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about what happens next," she said. "Widow Cooper says I can stay with her as long as I need, and the school might have a proper teaching position for me by spring. I'm building a life here, Adam. A good one." Adam nodded, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "I'm glad, Maggie. You deserve every happiness." She turned to face him directly. "But something's still missing," she continued, "or someone, I should say." Adam's breath caught, but he remained still, waiting. "That proposal you made before the trial, it wasn't the right time," Maggie said softly. "I needed to stand on my own, to know I could survive without depending on anyone else. I think I've proven that now, to myself at least." "You have," Adam agreed. "You're the strongest person I know, Maggie Graham." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "But being strong doesn't mean being alone. I don't want to be alone anymore, Adam, not when I could be with you." Adam's fingers tightened around hers. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that if that offer still stands, if you still want a life with me, then my answer is yes." In one fluid motion, Adam was on his feet, pulling Maggie up with him and into his arms. "The offer stands," he whispered against her hair. "It always will." Their wedding took place in the chapel, where they had first truly spoken to each other, on a bright December morning. Reverend Mills performed the ceremony, his aged face beaming with satisfaction as he pronounced them husband and wife. Half the town turned out to witness the event, most genuinely pleased to see Maggie find happiness after all she had endured. With her portion from the sale of the Golden Spur and Adam's savings, they purchased a small ranch adjacent to the Silverado property. It wasn't much, a simple cabin, a barn in need of repair, and 30 acres of land that had been neglected by its previous owner, but to Maggie, it was a palace compared to the cramped room above the saloon, where she had spent so many years in fear. Their first year together passed in a whirlwind of hard work and simple joys. They repaired the cabin, planted a garden, acquired a small herd of cattle, and began to make the neglected land productive again. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch Adam had built, watching the sunset and planning their future. Maggie continued to teach part-time at the town school, riding in 3 days a week while Adam managed the ranch. Her confidence grew with each passing month. The fearful girl from the chapel transformed into a woman who knew her own strength and worth. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed to Adam one evening as they sat before the fire, her head resting on his shoulder. "For so long I was just surviving, never daring to hope for more." Adam pressed a kiss to her temple. "You deserve every happiness, Maggie, every single one." Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. As the desert bloomed with unexpected wildflowers after winter rains, Maggie discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled their home with even greater joy and purpose. "A baby," Adam marveled, his hand gentle on Maggie's still flat stomach. "Our baby." "I'm a little afraid," Maggie admitted. "I don't exactly have the best example of family to follow." Adam shook his head firmly. "You have your parents' memory. You've told me how kind they were, how they loved you, and you have your own heart, Maggie. You already know what a child needs because you know what you were denied." His words reassured her, as they always did. In the years she had known Adam, he had never broken his promise to be gentle. His strength had always been used to build, to protect, never to harm. Summer arrived, bringing with it sweltering heat and the unexpected news that Vernon Graham had died in prison. The letter from the territorial authorities was brief, stating only that he had succumbed to pneumonia after a lengthy illness. Maggie received the news with complicated emotions, not grief exactly, but a strange emptiness followed by a profound sense of relief. The shadow that had loomed over her future, however distant, was finally gone for good. "Are you all right?" Adam asked that night, concern evident in his voice as he found her sitting alone on the porch, staring at the stars. "I think I am," she replied slowly. "I didn't love him, couldn't, after everything, but he was my only blood relation, the last connection to my parents." She sighed softly. "But now that's gone and all I feel is free. Finally, completely free." Adam sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "You've been free since the day you found the courage to speak against him," he reminded her gently. "This just means you never have to look over your shoulder again." Maggie leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "We're creating our own family now," she said, her hand resting on her growing belly. "A family built on love and kindness, not fear and control." "That's right," Adam agreed, "and that's a legacy worth building." Their daughter, Elizabeth Catherine Thornton, was born on a crisp October morning, almost exactly a year after Adam had proposed on the plateau overlooking the valley. She arrived with a powerful set of lungs and a shock of dark hair that matched her mother's. "She's perfect," Adam whispered in awe as he held his daughter for the first time, his calloused hands impossibly gentle with the tiny bundle. "Absolutely perfect." Maggie watched them, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. "She looks like you around the eyes," she observed, smiling tiredly. "God help her," Adam chuckled. "Poor child deserves better than my squinty gaze." "Your kind eyes," Maggie corrected softly. "The first thing I noticed about you, even when I was terrified in that chapel. You looked at me with kindness when I'd forgotten what that looked like." Adam carefully returned Elizabeth to her mother's arms, then sat on the edge of the bed, his hand stroking Maggie's hair. "You know, my mother would have loved you," he said thoughtfully. "She always said true strength wasn't in how hard you could hit, but in how gently you could love despite having every reason not to." "She sounds wise," Maggie murmured, gazing down at their daughter's peaceful face. "I wish I could have met her." "She's here," Adam said simply, nodding toward Elizabeth. "In how we choose to raise our daughter, in the love we give her, That's how the best parts of people live on. The years that followed brought more children, twin boys, James and Thomas, born 2 years after Elizabeth, and another daughter, Sarah, who arrived 3 years after the twins. Their small ranch prospered, expanding as Adam's skill with cattle and horses gained recognition throughout the territory. Maggie eventually became the head teacher at Copper Creek's growing school, her natural gift for education finally finding its proper outlet. The children of the town, including her own, adored her patience and creativity, never suspecting the painful path she had walked to reach her position. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Adam surprised Maggie by taking her back to the chapel where their story had begun. The small building had been renovated over the years, but its essential character remained unchanged, a simple sanctuary where people came seeking peace and finding it. "Do you remember that day?" Adam asked as they stood in the quiet space, winter sunlight streaming through the windows. "Every moment," Maggie replied, her fingers unconsciously touching her lip where the long-healed split had once been. "I was so afraid, so certain there was no way out." Adam took her hand, raising it to his lips. "And I was just a drifter, looking for work, not expecting to find the love of my life hiding in a chapel." Maggie smiled, the expression lighting her still beautiful face. At 32, she had blossomed into a confident woman whose inner strength matched her outer grace. "Do you ever regret it, getting involved in my troubles when you could have just ridden on?" "Never," Adam replied without hesitation, "not for a single moment." He drew her closer. "I made a promise that day, Maggie, to be gentle all my days with those who needed kindness. I didn't know then that the promise would shape my entire life, but I'm grateful every day that it did." As they stood together in the place where fear had first given way to hope, Maggie reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a frightened young woman with a split lip to a mother, teacher, and wife who had found strength she never knew she possessed. "I love you, Adam Thornton," she said simply, "for keeping your promise and for helping me find the courage to keep mine to myself, to believe I deserved better." In response, Adam kissed her with the same gentleness he had shown from the beginning, a testament to a vow made and kept through all the days of their life together. Outside the chapel, their children waited with the horses, laughing and calling for their parents to hurry. The future stretched before them, not without challenges but faced together, with the strength that comes from knowing you are truly loved. As they walked out into the bright winter sunlight, hand in hand, Maggie thought of how a single moment of kindness in a small desert chapel had changed everything, how the words of a gentle cowboy had opened a door to a life she had never dared to imagine. It was, she reflected, the greatest blessing of all to be loved not in spite of your wounds but with a tenderness that helped them heal. And as they rejoined their children and mounted their horses for the ride home to the ranch they had built together, Maggie knew with absolute certainty that this was what true freedom felt like, not the absence of past pain, but the presence of a love strong enough to build a future beyond it. The setting sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson as the Thornton family rode toward home, their silhouettes merged with the landscape they had come to love. And in that moment, with her family around her, and the man who had kept his promise of gentleness by her side, Maggie Graham Thornton knew a peace that went beyond mere happiness, the profound contentment of a life redeemed by love and lived in the freedom of its embrace.